Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I get to talk to interesting people to try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go around is Greg Olijnyk. During the day, he's a graphic designer, and at night, he's meticulously creating the most marvelous little sci-fi worlds out of nothing more than cardboard and a scalpel. Some of these intricate pieces take months to create, but this soft-spoken Aussie explains to me how it's not the complexity he seeks from the piece, rather, it's the connection others have with it. I hope you enjoy this chat with Greg. The man of mystery behind the curtain. I get it.
Oh no, it's not by sort of choice. It's just something I don't feel is as interesting as the work. But, there you go.
Well, I think that was actually a really interesting sentiment. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to include that. So I would go ahead and welcome you to the Why Am I podcast, Greg. And I have no idea how to say your last name. I'm sure you get that a lot.
It's Oh-lean-ick.
Olijnyk. I like it.
Oh-lean, scenic, hygienic, Oh-lean-ick.
Olijnyk. Excellent. Well, Greg, generally, it's so weird. I almost never run into anybody else named Greg. And so I feel like I'm talking to myself whenever I say my own name. It's such a bizarre experience for me.
Just get over it.
I'm attempting to. I will build a bridge and I will get over it rather rapidly. Usually I construct like a scenario in which we meet each other. It's obviously not going to be you and me deciding on which restaurant to go to. I feel like we would be stuck in an endless loop for a while there. But you and I happen to run into each other. Don't know each other. Maybe you strike me as the kind of guy that likes to go for walks. Like you, outdoorsy type of fella.
I try to be. I'm stuck in my studio here, which is where I'm sitting at the moment, for far too much of the day. But my wife and I do like to go for walks in the morning when we can. I go for bike rides as often, probably not as often as I used to. But it's important to mix the outdoors with the indoors when it's not raining, which in Melbourne is not that often. So
Excellent.
It's sunny now, but that can change in about 10 minutes.
Well, maybe we happen to be walking the same route multiple days in a row. So my shyness and awkwardness and social paranoia melts away slightly, and I happen to strike up a conversation, and I tell you who I am, and we exhaust that quickly, and it's your turn to reciprocate. So who are you?
Hi, my name's Greg Olijnyk. I live in Melbourne, Australia, which you probably know because we're on the same path. So
yeah, for sure.
Next door. I work as a graphic designer, which is the primary mode of earning money. And as a hobby, I started making cardboard sculptures in 2017. So not that long ago. And between those two sides of my life, I'm kept pretty busy, sort of inside at the back of my house.
Well, you started with graphic designer. Tell me about that. How did you actually get into graphic design?
There are not a lot of sort of avenues to earning a living when you go to art school. So graphic design was sort of one of them. And so I sort of did a sort of a course concentrating on graphic design as my main subject, and moved to Melbourne from a country, a small country town in sort of 1980, and I started work in a small agency in Melbourne, and sort of after about sort of 10 years of doing that, went out on my own. So I've been freelancing for 35 years.
That is a long time.
Tell me about it.
I've done a little consulting
An
in my past.
eternity.
Oh, it feels like it, right? I've done a little consulting in my past, and I was always terrified by the idea of hanging up my own shingle and just going it alone, right? The fear of feast or famine has always prevented me. What made you brave enough to make the leap?
Well, back then, that leap wasn't a big one because the sort of, we just rented a small apartment, so it wasn't a huge chance to take, but it, it turned out okay. I think just the freedom of being able to sort of work, when you want, with whom, and being. People say it must be great to be your own boss, but really, if you've got several clients, you've got several bosses. There's no such thing as having it your own way, but you can walk away from it at the end of the day. So that appealed to me, and I think it's a natural progression for anyone who's been working in a graphic design studio for several years. You sort of, the next step is a natural one, and that's to sort of start working on your own and build your own little empire if you can. I've decided I just wanted to stay as a one-man operation, so that's what I've been doing for the last 35 years, since 1992, something like that.
One man operation. That sounds lonely. Do you like working alone? Is that something well, it sounds like you're accustomed to it.
Yeah, I started working for myself, and then sort of shared a studio for several years with some other designers, and then sort of recently, since COVID, I've gone back to sort of working on my own in the studio. So it hasn't always been on my own, and I do get to sort of catch up with old friends. So it's not quite as drastic as it sounds. But it's
My wife once told me, if you don't want a boss, you have to be the boss. But I learned once I finally became the boss that you're still beholden to someone. There's always somebody you're beholden to, and it ended up being the customers, right?
Yeah. It's not the freedom you sort of expect it will be. But I think if you've ever been in a design studio, you know that it's you're never entirely free for anything. You're always sort of beholden to other people's opinions, decisions, whims, and ill-informed opinions. Sometimes that's part of being a designer. I guess you really have to fold that into sort of your work and sort of choose your battles and move on, because
Yeah.
always another project to do, sort of tomorrow and the day after, and so on. It's the rest of your life until you die.
For sure. Well, I mean, you've only been doing it 30 years, so they definitely know what's best, right?
I've been a designer since I was 21, so that's probably 40 years, I think, 45 years.
That's a long time to dedicate to anything. So I'm assuming you knew from a young age you were going to do something in art then.
Well, I think most people who follow the sort of trajectory I've taken sort of say they were the ones doing little sort of drawings on the kitchen table as a kid, and that was pretty much the same with me. So yeah, it was always going to be art, painting, whatever, and as I said, artists in a country town don't really sort of they usually end up working at McDonald's or some other place, because it's almost impossible. And I didn't really want to suffer for my art, so I just went down I'll sell myself to the highest bidder. But then, design is art, and in its own way, I try to put as much as I can into it as well.
Yeah. Were your parents pretty encouraging of the art thing, and go be an artist?
I had no idea what a graphic designer did, and a lot of my friends now still don't. When you try to explain to them what it is, they go, "That sounds really boring, Greg. Yeah, how long have you been doing that for?" So they they were happy that I had any kind of job. So, because they thought, oh, he's an artist, he's not going to get anywhere. But especially in a small country town. So, yes, but the jobs are in the city, so I sort of moved there, and I've been in Melbourne since forever, really.
So I hear you saying artists. So many people that work in kind of the creative industry are very relevant or resident or hesitant to call themselves artists, but you don't seem to have a problem with it. Why do you think that is?
I don't see it as a dirty word. It's sort of kind of what if you're engaged in producing art, you're by default an artist. So
yeah, that's the way I always thought about it too. Like, it's always perplexed me why some people are so afraid to put a label on themselves.
Do you think they see themselves as being a bit pretentious by calling themselves artists?
I don't know. Maybe for some people it's a little scary, like, to say I'm an artist. Like, maybe it kind of gives the impression of some level of mastery, like I am this amazing artist, or you know what I mean? And I don't know, maybe it's the imposter syndrome sort of kicking in. I'm not sure.
My kid was 4 years old and she was an artist. If you engage in art, you're an artist by default. So that doesn't mean you do good art, art that anyone else wants to look at. I have more of a problem with people who call themselves artists that aren't artists, who don't engage in art. I guess, we open the whole sort of AI can of worms there, which we probably won't go into.
But, we can if you like. It's in my notes. I was curious to what your impression was.
I've engaged in a couple of those conversations, but it's a bit like politics. People think AI is a tool. I think AI is really the artist, and the person who does the prompts is an art director. It's a bit like sort of in a design studio. I wrote this on a site once, that in a design studio, the artists are the ones who actually do the hard work, who sort of agonise and do the long yards and work out, sort of agonise over a colour or a stroke or a shape or whatever, and sort of just not, work it out. Putting some prompts, even though that's important, into a computer, and then pressing the button doesn't make you an artist. But then, on the other hand, I've seen some AI work that I'm going, that's amazing. So, it's obviously not cut and dried, but I think the terminology needs to be worked out. So that I'm not even sure that people who do sort of prompts for AI programs always call themselves artists, because I can see the delineation of what the computer does, what is done automatically, based on other artists' work, and putting in some prompts saying, I'd like to see some art that looks like this, and then the computer goes off and does it all. So, it's not a tool. It's a hammer. A hammer doesn't build a house. It doesn't design a house. It's the architect that designs a house. The hammer is a tool that builds it. So there's quite a difference.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. So, because it's my thoughts on it have sort of changed, and I'm in this kind of confusion point. I think I found myself. So I'm in the IT industry, and I actually work in automation, and I help customers figure out how to automate the things they do normally, right? But here's the trick. Our software is not magic. You still have to know how to perform your job. You still have to be a subject matter expert in what the automation is automating, right? Whereas AI feels more like quite literally anybody that's literate can put in a prompt and have some arts. I mean, a 5-year-old that can type some basic words would be able to put in a prompt, and AI would be able to spit it out. And also AI, I thought it was interesting at first, but then I, started really kind of ruminating on how it develops all this art. And what they have done is they've fed hundreds or probably hundreds of thousands of hours of human time creating this art. They've just fed it in there and had it train itself on it, right? And so it's really off the backs of all these humans that probably spent lifetimes learning and mastering this craft. And now
Centuries of
this, it so it and these artists get zero recompense for that, zero anything, right? But also one could argue, well, a human could study an artist's work and do their own version of it, and how is that any different? Well, it's because this thing can consume all art that's ever existed, right? And no human can technically do that, so it's kind of a cheat code.
I've kind of it's just occurred to me that the logical sort of extension of the whole AI creating art based on other artists' work, you come to the conclusion that once all the artists have died or gone broke and don't do art anymore, in a few years' time, where does the computer source that artistic sort of source code, if you will? You end up with no more natural art being generated by humans. It all is done by computers, and then at some point, doesn't all the computer art start looking the same because there's no inspiration. There's no sort of blood and toil involved in a computer putting art together. So you come to if you sort of get rid of all the sort of human artists, then sort of where does all that data come from?
That's such an interesting thought. Like, I had never thought about that. Like, if at some point humans were to stop, well, then the training, if AI was going to continue to learn, right, which is what it does, it would be learning based on other AI art that was created, right? So it's kind of becoming a copy of a copy.
Feedback loop.
Yeah.
Who knows what it will create? I mean, but I don't want to be around to find out.
Yeah, I certainly plan on being dead in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm gonna burn this meat suit out. I'm just gonna be done with it.
And the other thing is, it's like it's equivalent of a toddler at the moment. AI, it's still learning. We're in the first iterations of software that will become immensely more powerful. So people saying, "Oh, it's just a tool," and all the rest of it. At some point, the AI is going to be able to give itself prompts. You won't even need someone to say, "Oh, what sort of art you want." I don't know how that's going to work, but it's scary to have the people saying, "Well, I can't do hands and all that sort of stuff." Well, we can now, and tomorrow we'll be able to do something else better, and eventually, you won't need human artists at all. Just think about something and it happens. It's a scary world.
I wonder about that because I think about things like diamonds, right? So we can create diamonds in a lab, and they're flawless and they're a fraction of the price of the real thing, but we still buy the real thing, right? So I wonder if art won't be the same way. Like, we could technically do the AI generated thing, but there's just, I don't know, there's something different about going to an actual artist, somebody that that put blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. And I don't know, I appreciate things that are kind of artisan. I don't know that I'm representative of many people, but I think there's still a lot of people that think that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, art's not just sort of pixels on a page. It's thick paint on a canvas. It's sort of collages of materials and all the rest of it. So it's a tactile sort of living beast that it needs to be experienced in the flesh to be appreciated. So just because you can print something, you can imagine something and it'll come out on the screen. That's one piece. That's one kind of art. But it's all the art that I've got in this house. It's all 3-dimensional, or it's made with paint or airbrush or pigment. It's an actual physical thing. And so, as I said, you some of these things you walk around in, and that's why people go to galleries rather than looking at art online. It's because they want to be in the presence of the art, and by extension the artists, and
Mm.
their presence embodied through their artwork. So yeah, I mean, it's a muddled up world. I don't know where it's going to go. We'll see.
You know,
Let's talk about this in 10 years.
absolutely. You know, for me, AI will never replace art that I acquire. So every piece of art that I've ever bought, I bought it because of a story. So, and it was generally after meeting the artist and talking to them. They would like, so there was an artist named Nemo, and he does these little circular drawings, like tiny little circles, and it ends up being these beautiful pictures. And he was telling me how, how he does it. But what really sold me, he's like, yeah, and I have like this bucket full of pencil bones. I was like, what is that? And all the little nubs of pencils that are left over, he calls them pencil bones. And I go, if I buy a piece of art, can I have a pencil bone? And so I bought 2 pieces and I got 2 pencil bones. Like, I don't know, it was just something magical about the story, the connection. Like, if I touch that pencil, like, I don't know, it feels like I'm touching a magic wand or something.
I think it's proof of process. That's, I mean, I guess that's one of another main difference between sort of AI art. It's the process is hidden. It spits something out at the end, a bit like that sort of, you're in a photo booth and your photos come out at the end. It's sometimes with art, it's the process that matters.
Mm.
The destination is almost secondary to the artist anyway. But obviously, if you're buying art, it's sort of hearing about sort of the process of the art and how it came to be, and a physical representation of that, which is the pencil nub or sort of offcuts of cardboard or whatever.
Yeah,
is an important part of that process. It's at its heart an emotive process of producing art, and then someone else responding to it in an emotional way. So, and sometimes you need that physical art in front of you to go, okay, I can see the little pencil marks. I can see the evidence of process in creating the thing.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it gives me a sense of connection to this other person and what they've done, and in a way that I will never be connected to a server somewhere out on the internet. It's just I'll never make that association.
No, yeah, it goes against the tactile quality of a lot of art. So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, I mean, we've danced around it, or I guess I've danced around it, about your art, your so-called hobby, which is fascinating and amazing. Because when I showed my wife, like, I watched her face and she was like, wow, the stuff you do is crazy. And it's obvious that it's an absolutely intense labor of love or madness, perhaps, maybe a mixture of the two. But tell me about your cardboard art.
Okay. Where to start? My wife said, "Greg, you're a few years off retirement. What the hell are you going to do with your time? Because I'm not going to be around, sort of listening to you whinge about sort of being bored and whatever." And it's a real issue. So, I've been interested in the sculptural side of art for years and years. I never really kind of had the outlet worked out what that process was going to be for me, and I was at some point producing large scale typographical elements like big letters and like sort of a metre high and painting them and aging them and sort of it was just an extension, I guess, of my graphic design sort of work, and putting them on the wall as sculptural elements. I kind of like that, but I have a physical sort of situation where I don't have a shed, or I can't be bothered with cutting up things and making noise and all the rest of it. So as a graphic designer, especially the old school graphic design, where you would before computers. Yes, there was a time, children, before computers, and we were cutting up things and doing bromides in the dark room and cutting things up with scalpel blades and sort of on sort of architects sort of drawing boards, and that's the way artwork was done back then. And so I happened across some other artists who are putting together sort of art based on cardboard, and I went, I wonder if that's something I could do. So, the first thing you do as an artist is copy someone else's art, and of course I couldn't, because it's my art diverged into another sort of place altogether, because that's what you do when you're trying to copy someone else's, and almost by accident you put your own sort of thought processes and aesthetics into that, and produce something else. And I went, okay, that wasn't too hard, and I enjoyed the process and the outcome, and cardboard was a great medium to work with, because it just needed so few tools. From my point of view, all you really needed was a cutting board, a scalpel blade, some cardboard, and a steel ruler. And at a minimum, you could produce art with that. So I just drew on my skills developed over a couple of decades of working with paper, card, and scalpel blades as a designer, and it just all came together magically. Because I had no expectation of what I was going to do with it. I just sort of did it because it was fun, and whatever you can imagine, you can pretty much build with cardboard. And as I said, I think it was maybe because I was really sort of impatient. I wanted to see something done quickly. So working with steel or wood seemed like a sort of it was going to take far too much time. So it just cardboard was, a cut, a fold, glue. There you go. You've got a robot head, and so everything else was pretty much an extension of that. Plenty of ideas there. Just I soon found out that the more complex, the longer it took, and before long I was working on things that took 4 months to build. So yeah, wasn't I crazy?
That's wild. So whenever you're creating these designs, and some of them are extremely intricate, like you said, like months to create these things, do you do kind of a rough sketch of what you want, or is most of this stuff just kind of free form?
It's free form.
That's awesome.
I'll either well, there are two ways. Basically sort of two categories of work that I do. One is an idea of kind of what I want, especially for the bigger pieces, especially the building sort of related these architectural pieces. I might do a little pencil sketch, sort of about this big, on how I think it could look, and then it's all just sort of cutting and pasting from there on in. Other ones I'll just, especially with the robots, which aren't really narrative driven, they're simply just objects. So in their own right. So I'll just start with the head and just make it up as I go. And I found that's a lot. Drawings are sort of almost limiting. You're stuck to, obviously sort of stuck to producing something that looks exactly like the drawing. But when you're working in 3 dimensions, every piece informs the next piece, and you go, okay, well, hold it in your hand, and suddenly you sort of see things that you wouldn't have thought of if you were doing a drawing of it or doing plans of it or something like that. So I wanted to get away from all that sort of laboriously sitting down and doing sort of ornate sketches. That's kind of what I do in my design work. So being being more of a sculptural sort of medium made it a lot. It freed me up to sort of create as I went, and it's being cardboard. If you make a mistake, you just sort of backtrack a couple of pieces and do something else. So it's worked out pretty well so far.
Yeah, I was when I was listening to you talk about that, I was going to ask you, is this sort of opposite of your normal design kind of day to day? Because this sounds very free flow or free form and sort of flowing and just kind of as the mood takes you. Is it kind of cathartic, I guess, in a sense?
Yeah, as a graphic designer, you're constrained by some sort of brief. You have an outcome to achieve, and you can do it in several artistic ways. But that outcome is predetermined, so you need to solve a particular problem graphically. So whether it be sort of a layout for a brochure or coming up with a logo or a brand. What's expected at the end, and you're subject to the approval of other people. So being the client, doing sort of the cardboard sculptures that I do means I'm beholden to none of that process is not there. I mean, apart from sometimes your own sort of views, and you're harder on yourself than any sort of client would be, but you kind of know. That's why I make them up as I go, because I can sort of change direction. I can add things. I can just create as I go in a very free form way that it is quite freeing. Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like you wouldn't be interested in doing commissions for the cardboard work, because that would sort of limit your creativity, huh?
No, not really. I don't really get a lot of commissions. I did one for a lady in Seattle a while back, and it was just one of my robots. That's all she wanted. So I still sort of ended up designing it the way I wanted it, and sent it over. So it was just another one of my works, and it followed the same process that I usually do. People don't come to me saying, I want this, 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 and this. And, but even so, I mean, I probably could achieve something like that as well, as long as I could do it my own way. And do a sort of cardboard scorpion. Okay. But I could do a pretty cool cardboard scorpion if I really put my mind to it. And it'd still be fun. I could do it at my own pace. So it's all, the creative process is still there, whether it's doing it for myself or doing it as a commission.
How do you know when a piece is done? Like what's the determining factor, you reckon?
The feet. Once the feet are done, the robot's done. It's or I look if the building's done. If I've done several pieces based on sort of apartment buildings or sort of architectural sort of elements, and you kind of when you're finished, you kind of run out of room. These pieces I found as they get bigger are really difficult to sort of transport or freight overseas. So I'm sort of going back, and I've run out of room in the spare bedroom. So stuff that hasn't been sold, it's taking up a lot of space. So I'm trying to concentrate on smaller pieces now.
Well, you have done some gallery shows up to this point, right?
At Fine Art Gallery, which is sort of in Brunswick here. In Melbourne.
How'd you find that? Because I'm assuming most of your art, when you're creating it, people aren't able to really directly touch you and shake your hand and all that stuff. What was it like actually doing the gallery experience?
Okay. I still haven't shaken anybody's hand because my first gallery opening as a solo show came out The opening was 3 days after Melbourne was shut down by COVID.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah, that didn't happen. The show went on, still went on in an online sort of way, but I've still not been to an opening of my own sort of exhibitions.
I'm assuming that was a pretty big disappointment, huh?
Yeah, it was. But as I said, it's all about the art. So it's all a bit. If I was an American, that'd be fine. I couldn't wait to get out there and focus myself. Not that I'm judging, but it's just a sort of an observation.
Yeah.
My American brethren seem to be sort of have a lot more self-confidence in representing themselves, their work, and all the rest of it. I really want to be in the background. I was always suspect about sort of Instagram sort of accounts where the artist is in every single shot or every second shot. The art's in the background. I wanted to turn around. So because the art's the thing, really, isn't it? I could be totally invisible and it still would be out there and people would still respond to it. So that's what I want out of the whole process.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
No. I was just gonna. Yeah. I mean. Yeah, but it sounds like you're creating the art for the art's sake, and you don't necessarily need or require anybody's approval as far as, hey, your art is great or not. But I don't know. I think a lot of people like a good job every now and then.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. I just want to be appreciated from afar. Again, it's that sort of confidence thing. I think it's a little bit of a disappointment sometimes to meet the artist when you. I try to sort of stay, as I said, in the background as much as I can. But yeah, certainly, I'm always happy to hear how people respond to my art, whether it's good or bad, and what they like about it. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it's not an intellectual process. Once you put it out there and it's a physical object, then you're asking for some sort of interaction with a wider audience. And exhibitions or gallery exhibitions sort of are really the logical extension of that, because as a painting, you can look at something online and get an idea of what it looks like. But as a sculptural piece, you need to really get up close and personal and walk around it and experience its scale, how the light works, sort of bounces off the object, and sort of see it in its sort of its full potential. And that's what sculpture is. I mean, any bust of a person or a sort of sculptural piece, especially more abstract stuff, you need to get that gut reaction by being in the same space and time as the piece itself. So and there are lots of details in my stuff that I can't take dozens of photographs. I suppose I can, but and post them so you can see every single little element. But you need to be there and walk around it and experience it sort of in the flesh, so to speak.
Mm. Yeah, I also think like when I'm going to a gallery, right? I put myself in a different mindset. Like I'm actively getting in my car, I'm going someplace, and for the sole purpose of enjoying this thing. So I sort of enter a different, it's kind of like when I go to the movies, right? It's sort of suspension of disbelief, right? I'm going to see this guy flying around and I'm not yelling at the screen, hey, you can't actually fly. You know what I mean? It's like, I go there for that purpose, and I kind of put myself in a mindset. And I think for me, going to a gallery space to observe things I kind of do that as well. And so I could definitely see, yeah, the 3D nature of what you do, kind of bringing life to it in a way that you never would be able to just looking at a flat image of it. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, almost all sculpture's like that. It captures a slice of space and time, as I said before. It sort of, yeah, you need to be in the same space at a particular point in time to appreciate the physicality of a piece of sculpture, whether it's cardboard, metal, wood, whatever. It's an important part of appreciating a piece.
And something else that your art does for me, and it's genuinely the kind of art I usually kind of seek out, is the intricate nature of it. And so your art, like the pieces, they're very, it feels very sci-fi inspired or very industrial, all the robots and stuff like that. And one that appeals to me, to the nerd part of my brain, but also the fact that, and I've done this, I've revisited the two-dimensional pictures of your work a handful of times. And every time I sit and look at it, I give myself an extra 10 seconds. I pick out something new, some little detail, some little quirk. And I can just tell by the nature of your art, I could walk by it every week, stop and look at it and find something new and something different. And I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. I think that's part of what I aim for, is to load it with enough detail that it becomes a bit like a painting, where you see something a little bit new every time you look at it, or have a new sort of emotion every time you look at it. There are certainly pieces I've done which have been less successful because they were overloaded with detail without consideration of the design or the form of the piece, and you can go down that way, and that's kind of what AI art kind of it's the downside is it will generate as much detail as you want, but sometimes detail for its own sake isn't really, it's not, you don't respond emotively to detail for detail's sake. It's more, sometimes it's the it's the simple Picasso sort of sketch of a bird with a few sort of brushstrokes that sort of gives you sort of more of an emotive response than something that's taken someone sort of 6 months to put together of 100,000 matchsticks or something like that, or whatever. So it's not purely an exercise of the more detail the better. It's really the design, the narrative of the piece. And I try to, with a lot of pieces, I try to include some sort of story, so that it's not just an object there. I do those as well, but my more successful pieces, I think, are ones that have some sort of backstory to them. Where, okay, you can see why this thing is the way it is. Whereas the robots are just sort of fun bits that you just put together and appreciate them for their own form. So there are different stories and different sort of things I'm trying to achieve with each piece.
So whenever you have a backstory to a piece, is that something you want somebody to be able to look at the piece and intrinsically understand what the backstory is? Or do you want it to be something that you get to tell them?
Both. Sometimes the backstory is there, but it's open to interpretation. A bit like, what's this art meant to mean? Well, what do you want it to mean? But the pieces are there in the sculpture, so you can interpret. It's not one backstory; it can be several. I mean, I come about it from one aspect, but it doesn't mean that someone else sort of looks at it from another point of view. I had a concept of the stranger in our midst sort of thing. It started out with a very, very simple premise of it's a bit like, you ever heard of Tom Waits' What's He Building in There?
I think I have.
It's a really spooky, the guy next door, all he can hear is sort of hammer noises, and lights at night and strange sort of comings and goings and all the rest of it. So there's an air of mystery, but you never know exactly what's going on. And I wanted to do a series of pieces like that. So you've got two apartment buildings looking quite normal, and in between them there's this weird thing that's got pipes and chimney stacks and sort of a barbed wire fence and just no windows with a sort of a metal door and sort of flickering lights behind it. So it was all an air of mystery. So what you take out of that, I guess, is very much a sort of a personal thing. But the form itself needs to be interesting enough. The detail needs to be there. A bit like sort of film suspension of disbelief, has to be realistic enough. The apartment buildings on each side need to be realistic enough so that you're sort of drawn into the story, and then the crazy piece in the middle makes a bit more sort of sense or looks more real because it's sitting in that sort of that context. So that was one aspect of one piece. I've just finished another one of 5 robots sort of sitting up against each other in a lineup, called The Unusual Suspects, and that was quite a bit of fun to do. But all of these things sort of start off with a little, that might be a good idea, and then for the next 4 months I'm trying to make it happen. So yeah, that's cool. That's up on my Instagram at the moment. But,
yeah, I saw that one. That one was so fun and cheeky. Like one of the robots is like flipping the middle finger, and one of them's kind of half exploded. Yeah, there's a lot of whimsy in that one. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's and sort of you got one of the robots has just sort of blasted the shit out of R2-D2 next door, but then he's looking away, pretending he doesn't know what's going on, and all the other ones are sort of leaning over to see what's happened. And the guy at the end is flipping the bird, sort of ignoring everything and not giving a shit about it. So it was like a combination of The Usual Suspects, the movie, and I think the lineup from Guardians of the Galaxy was sort of a kind of a mashup of those two sort of themes, just done with robots. The reason I do robots, by the way, is it's kind of, cardboard is a medium that works best with sort of straight lines and geometric shapes. So it kind of, which sort of I'm sort of really happy with anyway. So that's my aesthetic. But trying to do a dome with a bit of cardboard, it can be done, but it's a pain in the ass. So the robots came about from the sort of the opportunities but the limitations of the material, which you have to respect. The material will do some things really well, others not so well. So you work within that framework of limitations and see how far you can push it. So that's kind of one of the reasons why my work looks the way it does, because of the material I work with. If it was plasticine or clay, obviously it would look quite different as well. So there's a logic behind sort of why I do the things I do. Yeah.
And it's all a very manual process too, right? Like you mentioned, a cutting mat, scalpels, you have cardboard, and I'm assuming a straight edge. And you're doing this by hand. You're not using a plotter. You're not using a laser cutter. I mean, it's you making all of these cuts, right?
Yeah. If you think about it, doing a laser cutter means, one, you're going to burn the edges of the cardboard. So you end up with these little things you get on Etsy that are sort of made with cogs and all the stuff, and all the edges are black. So I obviously didn't want that. And you think about it, if you're doing something with a CNC cutter or something similar, laser cutter, you've got to feed in the plans. So again, you're starting off with a digital sort of process that you have to design every single piece, and then feed those files through, digital files through to a laser cutter, and then it does its thing. But it seemed like far too much work for me. And as I said, I make these things up as I go along. So, yeah, that's just not my workflow. And it keeps the human element in the whole process.
Yeah.
Assessing and reassessing shapes and sort of objects and all the rest of it as you go.
And it also, like the idea of laser cutting, kind of the work you do, it feels like it would be really rigid. And I know this sounds counterintuitive when a piece of art takes 4 months to create, but it sounds slow because, you know, while you're cutting cardboard, if you decide you want to just make a modification, you just make that modification and then see how it looks, and then move and then move and move. Whereas with the laser cutter, yeah, you would have to mock it up, you know, in Illustrator or something like that, move to the laser cutter, test it, then put it back in the software and make modifications there, and then just keep going back for it. It just seems like such an annoying iterative process.
Yeah, and it's inherently, there's a digital sort of part of that which I just wanted to get away from. I'm on the computer all day. The last thing we do is sort of, you know, be on the computer all night, sort of producing digital files for something I don't know how it's going to look. And then if you go down that route, well, why stop with a laser cutter? Why not just have a 3D printer and print the damn thing out? You know, it kind of defeats the whole purpose. You know, you go down that route, and then because with the advent of 3D printers, you can pretty much produce anything you want. But what I do is all about the material and the physicality of actually putting it together. So it's everything's a one-off. You know, you don't with a 3D printer. Does the capability of printing 100 off of each design diminish the worth of that initial design? I think it probably does. So I kind of just like the material. So I work with that directly with my hands, and you know, there's nothing really inherently difficult about those complex shapes. It's simply cutting one piece at a time. It's being bloody minded about it, I think. Going, yeah, I'm just going to sit here until I cut out, you know, all 10,000 bricks and stuck them on my building. It's sort of, it's part of the process, but it's an important part of the process because nothing is perfect. There are imperfections inherently sort of built into every piece I do, because in the end it's hand cut out of cardboard, and it celebrates the sort of the humanness of the process and sort of the input of the artist. So I think that probably distinguishes what I do as opposed to sort of what someone else does with a CNC machine or a laser cutter or a 3D printer. And they can be worthy as well. I'm not saying they're not important. It's just that's not the route I've chosen to go down. So.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about like cutting out 1,000 bricks or something like that for a building, how do you kind of get in the zone when you're doing that? Do you listen to music? Do you have your favorite sitcom going on in the background? It's like what are you doing like to get into your headspace?
I just listen to a bit of music, sort of a bit of background stuff, a bit of Brian Eno to sort of bring the mood sort of kind of mellow, and just head down. I suppose some people do have their own sort of ways of working. I found that I've just got to head down, bum up, and just do it. You know, in the end, you've just got to do it. It's only you. So, you know, it's you can have some music that sort of makes it sort of go a little bit better, but generally it's treating it like a little bit of a job, and you've got the boring thing to do before you get to do the good thing. You know, not every two pieces of a particular sculpture is much fun to put together. So some of them are just background stuff that, as I said, builds up the level of realism to a piece. And 10,000 bricks is a pain in the ass, but once they're applied, they look fantastic. So it's much better than printing it out and pasting a single board up and it just looks fake. So it's that suspension of disbelief by a lot of hard work and a few calluses and stuff.
What do you think is the favorite part of the process for you? Do you think maybe kind of when you envision something, or maybe as it's starting getting fleshed out, or maybe when you start finishing that last foot, you start getting on there, or maybe the finished product? I mean, or is it kind of all of it together?
It's every piece has its own has like key parts. So once I've done a head, for instance, if I'm happy with it, then that's cool. And then I go, okay, what the hell am I going to do? How's the torso going to work? So, and then that's oh my God, how's that going to work? And then you solve that. It's the resolution of each small problem that comes up as you're building a piece. As I said, with some of the robots, I really have no idea how they're going to come together, but that's why I start with the head, because the head gives it character, gives it sort of a personality. And once you've done that, produced the head, then you get an idea of how this guy's meant to look. Is he a big chunky guy? Is he a thin, sort of almost comical sort of shape? It changes depending on sort of how the head looks. So that's a key part in that process. And then all the rest of it is essentially sort of, assembling arms at the right length and the right sort of density and chunkiness, as I said. So those things sort of, there are little sort of moments of triumph along the way. That's the only way you can really sort of approach a piece that's going to take you a month or 2 months to put together, sort of breaking it down into little sort of achievable blocks and going, at that point, I'm happy with it, how it's going, and then that's all, yay. And then you move on to the next. And it's almost by the time you finish it, there's this brief, and then you're so sick with it, put it to the side and then start another piece. It's the same with a lot of artists. You won't sit down and just endlessly admire the piece you've just finished, because you can always see the problems with it, or the bits that you could have done better, but I just don't have time to go back and keep doing it because there's another piece I want to start. So it's really that sort of the looking forward to sort of how you're going to achieve the next sculpture and what that's going to look like, and how do I do that? And you're almost thinking about it as you're finishing sort of the previous piece. So it kind of it's a treadmill in a way. You haven't really got time to sit down and sort of go, yay, I've done it. I think that's you're always sort of striving for the next big thing, the next sort of piece that you're really going to be sort of happy with. And,
gotcha.
I suppose if anyone was completely happy with any painting or any sculpture, they just go, that's it. I don't need to do any more. I can't do any better than that.
Yeah, I heard somebody say one time, artists don't finish their work; they just abandon it. So at some point, you just decide, like, I got to stop. I got to walk away from this.
As I was saying before, I've got literally, we live in a moderately large house, and there's a big bedroom sort of up the hallway a bit, and it's filled with most of the cardboard sculptures that are on the Instagram or on the website, ones that haven't sold. And of course, you've got to build really great sort of perspex boxes for them to sit in, so they don't get chewed up by sort of insects or dust and all the rest of it. So there's a room full of a whole bunch of stuff there that needs to find a home at some point.
It sounds like listening to you describe.
They are abandoned because they're in a dark room gathering dust if it wasn't for the perspex boxes, and I'm out here sort of working on whatever the next piece will be.
It sounds like you describing the process to me. I think one of your favorite parts sounds like it's problem solving. Would you say that's correct?
Um, yeah, I think every piece of art is it's a personal opinion. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a journey to be taken, and it's as I said, the process is just as important as the outcome. Um, so yeah, it's there are, because of the physicality of what I do, you've got to work out how this piece fits in, how the arm fits into the torso, how I make it work so it sort of twists and swivels and all the rest of it. So there are there are a lot of mechanical issues involved in the sort of work I do and the pieces I work on that do require a bit of hard thinking. And sometimes I will sit down and do little sketches of how I see a sort of a pelvis pivoting
Oh,
on a torso and how the legs fit in. Because most of my pieces, especially the robot sort of inspired ones, do have a full range of movement because I just can't bear gluing everything in place and making them immobile. It kind of just doesn't seem right. So whether they all once they're in a perspex box sitting there, they're sort of static and they possibly won't ever move again. But I like to know that there's that element of life in them, so that you could pose them in another sort of pose if you wanted to.
that's cool.
And sometimes I can. It's good to do that so that I can pose them in a few ways to photograph them for Instagram and all the rest of it. So I think that's part of the process is the articulation aspect of, and that does involve quite a bit of problem solving.
Hmm.
But once I've
Yeah,
done a few,
as I
I've
said,
built up a library of how things work, how things don't work, and then sort of, going from there.
yeah, you've got kind of a cheat sheet. But I like the idea of that. Like that's almost kind of exciting to me. Like the idea of that as you're going through this. Oh, well, I've decided I want this piece to be here, but I've got to come up with some method to connect all of this. But it has to have the integrity to actually withstand the weight that I'm holding here and there. That sounds really. I know that seems boring to you probably, but that seems really fun to me. I love problem solving.
It's necessary. It's that bridge you have to cross to get to the next part of the sculpture. So it's cardboard can be quite light, but when you sort of start laminating bits of it together, it's almost like wood. It can be quite strong, but can be quite heavy too. So in the early days, I just tried to keep screws and metal bits away from my sculptures as much as possible, and I just had little toothpicks or barbecue skewers and used those for axes for rotating bits on. But an arm sort of out here like that, made of cardboard, can get quite heavy, and everything drooped, and it's just one of those practical aspects of building these things. It does have to occupy a physical sort of engineering space as well as an artistic space. So you've got to work out. There are two problems to solve. One is the aesthetics of it, and the other one is sort of physically how do these things actually interact with each other and articulate around each other. So there are problems to be solved in that respect. Absolutely.
That's cool. What do you have? Do you have any white whales? Any Moby Dicks out there that you want to conquer?
No, but I probably will come up with something. Um, no, I truthfully have to say there's not something that I aspire to that I haven't achieved yet. It's just come out with another interesting piece that people engage with. So it's sometimes though you go down that route and you just want to keep making something bigger, better, more complex. But I found that isn't necessarily what people relate to and appreciate.
Hmm.
Some of my smaller pieces that took 2 weeks to put together are liked more. Not that that's sort of the absolute gauge of anything, but people connect with much more than something that took me 6 months to put together. So it's not to do with as I mentioned before, complexity or scale. I think it's to do with that human connection to this robot that looks, cute or pathetic or whatever, has some human trait intrinsic in its form that people relate to, or it's sort of a narrative that sort of people can relate to or be intrigued by. It's just don't make it boring. That's kind of that's the number one commandment.
I think that's my quote of the conversation. It's about connection, not complexity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
Because I've done both, and it's kind of, I've found that if you can't connect with something in like 2 or 3 seconds, then it's swipe left, swipe right, that sort of thing. You on to the next thing. Because as I said, again, with AI or 3D modeling, you can make things as complex as all heck, but it doesn't make it a better piece or a more piece that you're more likely to connect with emotionally or spiritually or whatever. So yeah, I've come to learn that keep things simple and sort of just again being true to sort of your own process and the material, and at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, there's a whole bunch of sheets of cardboard in the cupboard. I'll just move on to the next, because not every piece of art is perfect or a success. As I said, it's not every piece I do is universally liked or appreciated, and that's fine. That's what art is. It's an individual connection to sort of something that moves you or makes you think about something else.
I think it's an amazing lesson, especially for younger artists. I see they want to take absolutely every piece of art they create and instantly get it on social media because they need that instant validation, that instant gratification. And if I've seen some people, they've put 1 or maybe 2 pieces up and they weren't well received immediately, and it's super discouraging, and they kind of stopped. And I think that's an amazing lesson, that people aren't going to connect with absolutely everything you do. Sometimes, you have to just keep putting your art out there till the right audience finds it. Maybe
if you follow any sort of artist that you're really sort of thrilled about online, especially on Instagram, and you go back through the history, the first few pieces can be a bit ordinary, get a few likes, but you keep scrolling, and that and you build an audience. And I think that's the same no matter whether you're online or in a gallery. People have to sort of see it and experience it to really become part of the journey. And if you quit, it's got to question what you're doing it for to begin with. I said to sort of, I did it for myself. It's got to be a personal sort of personal journey that at some point you go, okay, maybe someone else would like this as well, but that's not how certainly not what makes you start the whole journey to begin with.
It's it's a beautiful message. I think we're gonna put that one in the promo. I like that piece.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you, Greg, you have been so generous with your time, and right here towards the end, I usually like to ask my guests if they wanted people to interact, or maybe even from afar. If there's anything specific you'd want them to check out, maybe your website, maybe your social media, your Instagram, anything like that, how would you have folks interact?
Well, my Instagram's there for anyone to look at, and there's a link to the website, which is just a more sort of clinical sort of documentation of all the works I've done. If you like the stuff, just send me a like or a comment and say, I like your stuff. But otherwise it's out there in the ether, sort of existing in digital ones and zeros, but until someone actually sort of responds to it, experiences it, and says, yeah, that's good, I connected with it or not, then it's all a bit of an abstract experience, really. It's all to do with people responding to other people. And if they want to say, yeah, we like your stuff, or not, then that's all good.
That's cool. Well, thank you for your time and attention today. I really appreciate you coming out on the podcast and giving people a taste of who you are. The artist behind the art is oftentimes more fascinating to me than the art itself. So,
I think they probably just got an overall impression of a guy who's confused about exactly what he's doing. But that's fine. And not terribly articulate about sort of the whole process and the whys and the wherefores, but that's the way it is.
You don't get to choose how people
just go
enjoy
look at
your
the art. That's what I'm saying.
All right, let me hit stop on all this stuff.